everybody. I am Dr. Kerri Nevin and of Heartlight Psychological Services, and today I am here with the fabulous Mr. John Perricone. Mr. John Perricone is a best-selling author and a nationally and internationally sought-out keynote speaker, which is so amazing. And just a little bit of background. I am doing these interviews because I want to celebrate people who are advocates of mental well-being. And John Perricone is one of the first people that I thought of that demonstrates that innate capacity with whomever he meets. And so, yes, of course. And so it's just in terms of background, Mr. Perricone, feels weird to call you John, but
whatever you're comfortable with.
I think I can. I think I can do it. So, Mr. Perricone, John,
get some therapy.
I need somebody to help me out. Is there a psychologist in the house? What? John Perricone was my health teacher at Maynardville High School in upstate New York, where I grew up. And he made a lasting impression on me. His method of teaching always made everything so interesting. And I always felt that instead of dictating information for me to memorize, John had an authentic interest in knowing me as a person. He had an interest in finding out who I was and what I was about. And that time in my life specifically was very, very chaotic. And there was a lot of places that I felt very unsafe. But in John's class, even if we were talking about embarrassing health stuff, it was still a really safe place to be. So one of John's most defining characteristics, as I've said, is his ability to make everyone he engages with feel safe. And that's exactly how I felt in his class. I felt safe and I felt seen in places where that wasn't my experience for most of my life. And he saw me not as a student, but as a person. He always told the truth.
Oh, Kerri, I'm so honored. And before we begin, I just want you to know nothing gives me greater joy as a teacher than to see one of my students realize what they were meant to be in this world. And if you're not the living embodiment of that, I don't know who is.
Oh my God. Bless you for saying that. I so appreciate it. It means the world to me. It means the world to me. And I don't know if you remember this, but you actually sought me out, years ago. And you were like, let's get together and talk on the phone. I'm sorry. I've never received a phone call from any other teacher or educator in my life that was interested in, hey, I remember you. I would love to talk with you. And we sat and we had just the most lovely conversation. And this is what I'm talking about. This is one of the things that makes you so unique and so special, is your love and your curiosity of people. And my goodness, anytime you post something on Facebook, oh my gosh, I know it's going to be good.
Thank you.
So I really am so pleased to be able to celebrate you, John, and to learn more about you and where you're at, what you're doing, what your message is, and who your audience is. And so if maybe I can get into some questions.
Absolutely. I'm so honored.
Awesome. Cool. So I only recently realized that you taught psychology. Can you believe that I did not know this?
Well, it only happened in the last 8 years of my career, so you were gone already. So you get a pass on that.
I get thank God, because I'm like, but I didn't even know that I wanted to be a psychologist at that point. Right. But given now that you had that interest, what drew you to psychology? What was the thing that
I've always had an innate desire and interest in understanding what makes human beings tick. Why do I act the way I do? Why do other people act the way they do? So psychology seemed a natural segue to that. And so when I took my first intro to psychology class at Binghamton University, I was like, Eureka, this is it. Here's the rub. Because BU was more research-driven and less clinical, and I was more interested in the human side of that, I thought, I don't know if this is really, well, we're going to see. When I took my second class, I'm in a basement room with rats with electrodes in their brain. I was like, this is not what I'm really interested. So the corollary question to teaching psychology is actually, why did I decide to teach health science? Because I hated my health class in high school. I remember going to my guidance counselor saying, please tell me there's some way to test out of this. I feel like I'm drowning in quicksand. It was an exercise in tedium beyond what you could ever imagine. And so, when you think about it, your whole life, when you're a kid, you're being given schedules, right? When you're in seventh grade, day 1, 3, and 5, you're going to have Mrs. Carlini for phys ed class, and these schedules just keep going. And all of a sudden, you're in the end of your sophomore year of college, and all these people that have been handing you schedules your whole life are sitting across from you at a table going, so, what do you want to do with your life? I'm like, you're freaking 19 years old. You have to declare your major. I don't know. Just at that juncture, a friend was visiting me from SUNY Cortland, and she had the course catalog, literally, when it was a physical catalog and I'm flipping through it, and it fell on the health science curriculum, and I literally cringed. I was like, ugh. And then I started looking at the subject matter, mental emotional health. I'm like, oh, that's psychology. I love that. I love psychology in college. Drugs and people. Oh, psychology and biology. Two of my loves. Nutrition, human sexuality, death and dying, life, meaning, purpose, philosophy. All the courses that I love. And I realized in that moment, my epiphany was, I hated this class, not because of the subject matter, but because of the approach to the subject matter. And I remember thinking that night, if I do this right, this should potentially be one of the most interesting classes a student's ever taken in their life. And I remember calling my dad at IBM that night. I says, Dad, I've got it. I know what I want to do. And I had 31 indescribably rewarding years in the classroom. So that's how so obviously when I went on to continue, I took adolescent psych and abnormal psych, and it just fueled my passion and my love for this study.
Well, there are two emotions that are so incredibly powerful. One is interest and one is curiosity. Again, you embody both of them.
Thank you.
You really, really do. And thank God, because you made a difference for me. And, all these years later, there were stories that you talked about and told in your classes that I still remember. But
you have no idea what it means to me just to hear you say that. I'm going to tear up. I'm going to cry whoever's watching this.
We're going to be cool, the two of us.
All good.
So let's talk a little bit about your the Facebook posts that you put out there. They all seem to center on your passion for, like you just said, getting to know people, celebrating their lives. Again, the post with your mom, the post with Vicky, love. And I love your humility as a man and being married to your wife and the things that you are still learning. It's an inspiration. And I've noticed that you've met all kinds of different people, but then there's a specific diner that you go to. And tell me, how did that come to be? And what was all that? What's all that about?
Okay, in chronological order, the questions you asked me. I've often said if I ever write a second book, it could easily be about the people sitting next to me on airplanes. Because I've come to the realization that if you're genuinely interested, everyone, and I mean everyone, has a story. I can't begin to tell. I'm just grateful that, like you said, it's in my nature to be inquisitive, because some of the greatest relationships in my life started by my turning to a complete stranger and saying, so what's the book you're reading? Where are you headed? What do you do for a living? And a conversation ensued. Regarding the diner, about my breakfast club. For all the years that I taught, on the last day of school, I put my private contact information on the board. And I said to my students on that last day these two things: if I can ever be of service to you beyond today, it'd be my honor. And secondly, the bell may end a class. It doesn't necessarily have to end a relationship. If 10, 15 years from now you're in town visiting your folks, maybe you have a family of your own, look me up. Let me treat you to breakfast at our local Broadway diner, which is owned by three of my former students, the Anastas brothers. And we'll catch up on life in real time. And as of yesterday, I'm at 1,297 of my students who have taken me up on that. And, because I post on Facebook where I'm speaking around the country, almost without exception, some of my former students reside there. I didn't even know Gilbert, Arizona existed. I've been there twice now. Five of my students and their spouses with the permission of my host, came to hear me speak. I took them out to dinner, and the conversation continued 35 years after the fact. So when I'm speaking to educational communities and I share this with them, I say to them, what other profession does that possibility even exist, that we can develop lifelong connections, the young people who filled our lives with so much meaning and purpose?
Wow. Wow. What a treat it is to see these students and to bear witness to the conversations that you have. I
One of the
mean,
most beautiful things in my life, one of the most beautiful things. And I'm just grateful for whatever I did in my life, that people always show their best selves to me. I heard Lady Gaga being interviewed one day, and she was talking about how much she loved her life, how much she loved her fans. But then she said this, she said, but what I would give to be able just to walk to that park and back, and I thought about, I've enjoyed in my life what I call comfortable recognition. Everywhere I go, doors open to me, Mr. P, Mr. P, they're my former students or their parents. It's the lovely, lovely thing, the lovely thing born of those 31 years in the classroom.
well, it's what you evoke. It's what, you're giving us all lots of credit, but I think it's, the tenor with which you approach, the emotional tenor that you
I appreciate that so much, but I want you to know that I discovered my first day of student teaching 43 years ago that teaching was learning. It was never going to be a one-way street, that there was going to be this beautiful symbiotic dance going on each day between my students and myself. So whatever my students feel that they derive from me, know that I got that 10,000 fold back. Just know that.
So everybody wins.
Everybody wins. Absolutely.
I love that motto. Everybody wins. It's my favorite thing. Well, I know that you received your 7th degree black belt from, which is the highest rank that from world-renowned karate master Heidi Ochai has ever awarded in his 57 years of teaching. My brother took lessons from Heidi Ochai back in the day, so I knew of him. This is so obviously a passion for you. I'm interested in knowing what led you to seek out karate to begin with.
A great question. When I was in the 7th grade, my brother was in the 12th grade, and he received a gift certificate for our next door neighbors, Walter and Gloria Thompson, to study for a month. I went to observe that class, and I found myself completely enraptured, in awe of this little 5'2", 120-pound man throwing these 250-pound bodies through the air like they were feathers. And because I was a physically small-statured young boy at the time, I thought, wow, what would it be like? What would it be like to have that sense of inner strength, that inner confidence? So it took me 2 years to muster up the guts to go. But on the night that I joined, I was in the 9th grade. I was 15 years old. The night that I stepped out onto that floor, Kerri, I knew that I had made a decision that was going to resonate for a lifetime, that what this little man from Japan was teaching so far transcended punching and kicking, that there was this beautiful and inspiring philosophy which acknowledges that every human being has inherent worth, dignity, and potential that's worthy of cultivation and development. And I want to be unequivocally clear that Mr. Ochai was the sole impetus for my decision to become a teacher. If I know anything at all about the art of teaching, it's been from 49 years of immersing myself in this man's culture, observing him teach, when he uses humor, when he's serious, how he adapts his message dependent upon who his audience is, whether he's speaking to professors at Cornell, men behind bars, 4-year-old children. And his philosophy has always been one of meeting his students at the door. If somebody comes into the dojo, into the karate school in a wheelchair with no legs, he doesn't go, oh, I'm so sorry. No. His job is to meet them right where they are and to help draw out the best that resides within them. That's the spirit in which I was trained to be a teacher. And I'll tell you, he had such a profound impact on me. I was in the 9th grade, as I said, when I began my training. I'm 64 now. I haven't missed a week. And I will freely admit that my training at the hands of such a deep human being made me a rather odd 9th grader. Most of my 9th grade friends were thinking about, most of my 9th grade friends were thinking about, hey, were we getting stoned tonight? You know what I was thinking about? How could I live a more actualized existence by making an honest confrontation of my own mortality? These are not typical 9th grade thoughts.
Not typical, John. No, I don't think so.
But because the philosophy underlying my martial art training was one of a sound mind and a sound body, it made sense for me to pursue the health science degree as my major thrust of study because they complemented each other so
Right.
beautifully. So you see how we came full circle back.
Did.
Why?
We completely did. That was so beautifully done. I could have never planned it.
Yeah, why I became something I never ever thought I'd be in high school. It,
Well,
it,
and
it
that
meshed.
right. And so we've got like that. There's no separation between mind and body,
Right.
right? Whatever the
Absolutely.
mind thinks,
They're one. They're one. We talk about them as though they're separate, but they're one.
they're one. And what an amazing journey. And I'm gathering that after 49 years, you had a lot to take in and learn from Mr. Ochiai.
You know something? Every single time I step inside that school, and I will do that tonight, I learned something I haven't learned before. Can you imagine that?
It's just incredible.
I mean, the white belt, the beginner's just trying to remember which is my left hand on my right shoulder. When I come in, he's looking at the 1/16 inch turn of my small toe on the floor. So you don't ever get this sense of, oh, I'm a big shot. I've arrived. It always feels like your first day. That's the sign of great teaching. I'll be honest with you. For someone to hold my attention for 10 minutes is a big deal. That he's held mine for 49 years. And I'll also be honest with you to tell you the self-defense part of the martial arts, that felt really good about 3 or 4 months in. It's been the philosophy that's drawn me back and drawn me back. And it's been a beautiful journey. It's been a beautiful journey, and it continues. And it continues.
I'm excited to see what else you're gonna learn because you're gonna learn again something more tonight. My husband has also practiced Tai Chi, Qigong for many years, and so I have an appreciation for what's involved in that.
Yeah, Mr. Oche says life is short, the art is long. In your whole life, you're not going to perfect. As long as you're striving, you continue to grow. You continue to grow.
Life motto, life motto. Let's continue growing because the second we stop, that's when we get in trouble. I was just listening to something today on Audible about challenge and how when you're that uncomfortable, when you're a little bit uncomfortable, therein lies the opportunity for
Absolutely.
growth. And I was listening to another book where it was about dopamine, the dopamine hypothesis. And the tenet was that everybody thinks you get the dopamine hit as soon as you make the achievement of the goal.
Right.
They looked at rats being fed and they paired a light with the food. And so, you would have thought, okay, the rats get the dopamine hit when they eat.
Right.
No, they get the dopamine hit when they see the light. It's the anticipation of the goal.
Right. Right.
Why it's so essential to bring in the new. That's why I think it really illustrates your experience with karate because it's new every time you go.
Every day. Every day.
Yeah. Oh, I love that.
We talk about shoshin. Shoshin means cherish your beginner's mind. Cherish the mind with which you began something. And I wasn't going to share this with you, but I'll share with you a beautiful visual metaphor that I share with teachers. When you begin in the martial art, you begin with the white belt. This is the beginner's belt. Mr. Ochiai gets up at 4 a.m. to train every morning, now at 84 in a couple of weeks. Believe it or not, even though he holds every international honor that can be held in the martial art world, you know what he says about all that? That means nothing to me. I did that to inspire my students. All that matters is what I bring to this moment. All we've ever had, isn't it? This moment. That's Yesterday's gone, tomorrow's speculation. He puts his white belt on as a symbolic reminder to himself, I have so much more to grow. I have so much more to learn. So here's a visual metaphor. This is my black belt that I received when I was 17. I had to retire it because it only had about 1 or 2 more pulls in it. It was. But can you see after many, many years of training what color it started to return to?
Yeah, white.
Right. If you look at Mr. Ochiai's original black belt, it's completely white. So I say to teaching communities, do you see the beautiful metaphor here? Here's a man who's trained for 80 years since he was 4 years old. Wow. His heart, in his mind, and his spirit, he's come full circle to today's my first day. I have my white belt on.
Wow, that's really mind-blowing and humbling to realize such a man.
To experience it every day.
Yeah.
Experience it. Yeah.
It's huge. Oh, so amazing. I want to just segue a little bit into the barbershop harmony side with the troubadours. All right. I heard you saying, I love it. It makes me happy just to listen. So How did that all come to fruition?
Well, what led me to sing was hearing my father's beautiful operatic singing voice growing up. My father was a very shy, very introverted, very easily embarrassed man. People who see me speak have a hard time believing that, but apparently it skips a generation. My dad literally would have rather died than doing what I'm doing right now, or certainly standing in front of a group of people. He sang in the church choir. He wouldn't take a solo. He would sing in the choir, but you know when he'd solo? When he was mowing the lawn, because he assumed that the sound of the motor was overpowering his voice. And my neighbors who loved to hear him sing would just lean into their screen doors so as not to alert him. Anyway, I was walking through the Oakdale Mall in the early 90s, shopping for whatever I was looking for, and I heard this beautiful men's chorus coming from the middle of the mall. And as I made my way there, I was in awe of this beautiful sound. And when they took a break, four gentlemen came down off the risers and they enveloped me in four-part harmony. I was like, oh my God, this is unbelievable. So in 1995, I joined the society, and I just couldn't believe that there was an organization whose primary goal was to help men and women sing better. I just couldn't. I kept waiting for them to pull white hoods over their head. I said, there's got to be another agenda there. And so anyway, a couple months in, I formed a quartet, and these gentlemen were so kind to give me carte blanche, to give me freedom to create an act. And so, because we were kind of like a stand-up comedy, because between the songs that were funny, right? Our goal was to make people laugh, to make them cry. It was just a beautiful, beautiful 16 years that we toured the country. One of our performances was professionally recorded. And if anyone goes to YouTube and types in John Perricone's Barbershop Quartet and you put the earbuds in, you'll be literally in the auditorium. But I'm telling you, Kerri, some of my favorite memories were literally of stopping at rest stops and warming up, and an impromptu crowd would form just to, just to see the light in their eyes, and to see how music, it's been said that music is the universal language, right? It
Yes,
it
yes.
it warms something in people's hearts and their souls. And yeah, so I've always said that teaching is my calling, karate is my art, and singing is my hobby.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Did you ever sing in class?
In where?
Class?
I
Like
did. I
you did?
did.
'Cause I
Yeah.
don't remember you singing when I was there, but I can just sort of imagine that experience in my
Yeah.
head, and I
My
was loving it.
my thank you. My early influence was, I couldn't do barbershop because I'd only be one of four, but as the kind of songs you would have heard me singing were Billy Joel or James Taylor, right? They were two of my biggest influences growing up, and I've had the honor to meet both of them a couple of times. So
Really?
yeah, yeah.
I feel like you're all good friends. You've met them a
I
couple
wouldn't say that, but I had the honor to tell them how much they meant to my life.
Oh, wow. How amazing.
Yeah.
How amazing for you. Gosh. Well, I love that. And I'm going to go to YouTube and I'm going to look that up because I need more of that in my life. I know that I get so uplifted when I hear music, and to come from you to be able to listen,
Thank you. Thank
and it's
you.
going to be a definite mood enhancer. When I work with patients, I often tell them, think about mood shifters in your life. Sometimes I'll be in session like this because really all of my clients are remote at this point. And my cat, his name is Onyx, he will get up on his hind legs and he'll push the door open. And then he jumps up on my shoulder while I'm doing. So I'm actually including some pet therapy. Well,
Yes, yes.
really amazing. You just think the effect that it has on people. Like it just sort of disarms them. And when COVID happened and you saw these newscasters like in their houses with their kids running around in the
Right.
back, it just sort of normalized and humanized everybody.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So I can't imagine my life. I didn't grow up with pets. I can't imagine my life now without them. And I can't imagine my life without music. The joy. I mean, for me, to be honest with you, I would have been so happy just to be in a stairwell with the four of us singing. That we got hired to perform all over the country and in Canada. It still blows my mind. It was
How
so
amazing.
yeah.
So now is that part's done because you're focused on some other things now? Is that
Yeah,
right?
when the bass in our quartet passed away a few years ago, my speaking was just getting busier and busier and busier. So I renew my membership every year, and I get together with them for a few events a year, but I'm not as active as I once was. But it's always in my heart, and I'll be going back. Right now, so much of my focus is on my speaking for
I
teachers and
I
nurses
see.
and
Um,
students.
so I'm trying to think of how to, like, what would be the next question for you? Um, well, why don't we talk about this? How did your teaching career morph into becoming a keynote speaker and motivational speaker? Like, can you take me through that journey and
And in 2003, my principal was Bonnie Hauber, and she pulled me aside one day and she said, "Mr. Perricone, would you be interested in presenting at a local teachers workshop?" I said, "Sure. What's the theme?" She says, "Anything dealing with parent-child relationships." I was like, "Anything?" I said, "Yes." So I wrote an hour and 15-minute workshop that I entitled "The Unconscious Parent, the Unconscious Child." And what I spoke to in that workshop, or what I referred to throughout my career, is the unconscious assumptions we all live by. For example, as you sat at the dinner table growing up, what did you observe in terms of how your parents dealt with conflict? How did they handle or not deal with it? How did they deal with their finances? What did you learn about gay people growing up? And all this stuff that just kind of unconsciously filtered into our system. And so the example that I used was I said, I was raised in a very traditional Italian family where when we were upset with each other, we just yell and scream at each other, and then we go out to dinner, and it was over. I said, my wife was raised in a family where everybody shut down in response to come. They didn't talk about it. So for the first 10 years of our marriage, mostly on an unconscious level, we were just defaulting to what we had learned. I'm not a screamer, but I would just put the issue out there. I thought it was over. 3 months later, my wife might as well have had a PowerPoint with a pie graph going up.
oh my God.
You said, I was like, I don't even remember. I don't even remember the conversation. But here's the point. Once that flushed up to a conscious level, what a difference it made in the quality of our marriage. Vicky realized, John's not necessarily upset with me. I realized this is not a good time to have this conversation with her. Anyway, apparently the workshop went over fairly well. People came up to me. I was in my 20th year at Maine Endwell at the time, 43 years old. And people said to me, have you ever considered doing keynote speaking? I think someday when I retire, no. Time is now. Time is now. You have 20 years under your belt. You have street cred amongst teachers. And from that day, 2 schools invited me to their school, and it forced me to put together the essence of an address that I'm now in my 21st year of giving. That continues to evolve. It's called Why Am I a Teacher? Developing a Philosophical Identity. And the basic premise of my address is that as human beings, we teach to others who we are. We teach who we are, and that our philosophies of life are intimately tied to our philosophies of education, and that it's our philosophical identity, if you will, our sense of mission or purpose that we envelop ourselves in each day as we walk into our respective classrooms, offices, the buses we drive, or lack of same, which ultimately distinguishes those who find joy and passion in their professional sojourns from those of us who find drudgery and just pick up a paycheck every couple of weeks when they come. So it's to this theme of their philosophical identity, to the existential question of who am I, the question that resides at the foundation of every human being on this planet. Who am I in this world? Does my life matter? That I have the honor of addressing them about an hour and 45 minutes, and it's an hour and 45 minutes of pure joy. Yeah, I don't know if you're aware of this, but most teachers dread their staff development days. I know how much I dreaded mine. I had to endure 62 of them, sadly, which only 3 were memorable. So to be able to walk into a room of complete strangers, many of them there begrudgingly, right? And to see a shift in their body language take place in less than a minute, where they're literally leaning forward thinking, oh my God, are we going to talk about life, philosophy, and meaning and purpose? I think people are just craving to have their humanity affirmed. That I get to do that professionally, I could not have envisioned a better retirement.
I mean, legit. It's so good. It's just, I think it's so wonderful. Like, you seem to have a Zen master quality at being able to reflect in others what they're most hungry for to be seen. I keep coming back to this place of being seen. And that was one of the things that I remember working with you or being a student in your class is that essence of being seen at a time when it wasn't necessarily completely safe for me to be seen.
I appreciate that so much. You have no idea what that means to me all these years later.
Yeah, I mean, and I'll tell you something else. So I, given that, had a problem and a phobia of public speaking, like really awful. I was looking at all of these students being able to project themselves and their ideas, and I was shut down. I was shut down. And I think I did that in order to attempt to protect myself. But it took me out of my life. It took me out of being able to model and see how relationships came to be and to be invested fully in relationships. Like I just didn't know how to do that. And so I think unconsciously I got into psychology because I wanted to understand what happened to me. I mean, I had like panic disorder. So anytime I was going to be called on in class, I mean, I was just literally jumping out of my skin. Um, and so it followed me from the age of 12 through into my 30s. And when my husband and I got married, we got married in 98 and we were going into practice at the same time. And I said, yeah, I'm not doing the whole public speaking thing, just so you know, you're going to do it. Yep. All right. And so his client look started going up. Mine wasn't really going anywhere. And I thought, what is this? And so I made a decision. I said, you know, come hell or high water, I'm doing this. So I got an invitation to speak and my back started hurting that day. And I thought, you know, if I have to crawl up on that stage, then so be it, because I need to be able to figure this out. I need to be able to do this. And that was the beginning of my being able to, you know, untie that knot.
Absolutely. And most people, you're not alone. Most people rank public speaking as a worse fear than death. And Jerry Seinfeld says, think about that for a moment. He says, that means if you're at a funeral, you prefer to be in the casket than giving the eulogy, right?
Oh my God, so well said.
It's true.
So well said.
What a wonderful thing that you made a career reflecting back on issues that were going on in your own childhood. Now you're helping other people. What's better than that? What's better than that?
I appreciate that so much. And I feel like, you know, one thing I tell the people I'm working with is when you realize something about yourself that you didn't have growing up and you develop it,
Yeah.
and you're able to give it to somebody else, to me, that's like the truest essence of real healing.
Absolutely.
You know?
Absolutely.
And that's what I think you do when you give these presentations, is that you serve as like a living mirror to others that are wanting to be seen and don't know how to do it themselves. And I think you just give everybody a leg up there.
That's so kind of you. I hope so. I hope so.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. And it's always the best too. You're always seeing the best. You're not reflecting like, oh, I don't like this about you. I don't like that about you. I think, was it Bridget Jones's Diary where the guy says, I like you just as you are, which of course is what Mr. Rogers says, right? And what Mr. Perricone says.
I'm so happy to be in Mr. Rogers' company. He's such a...
Oh my God, it's so good. It's so good. But that's what I think of when I think about who you are and what you do. And my dream, one of my dreams, is to be able to get you out here at Stevenson High School in Lincolnshire, Illinois.
It would be my honor. It would be my honor, my pleasure, if that happens.
I'm gonna do whatever I can to make that.
Yeah, and then I get to treat you to dinner and your husband, right?
So excited. Okay, I have just a couple more questions. So this is a good one. What experience or circumstance in your life that you initially perceived, John, as insurmountable, but that you actually overcame? What did that lead you to learn about yourself?
Wow, how much time do you have?
I mean, as much as you got, I got.
My 6th to 12th grade assembly that I present all over the country, it's taken me far as South Korea, is entitled Developing Inner Strength. That we are a society that celebrates physical strength, which is a wonderful thing to be in possession of, but we rarely, if ever, talk about cultivating inner strength. And in the history of the human condition, the most important strength we can possess as we navigate the many, many challenges each of us are going to face over the course of our lives. Frederick Douglass said, it's easier to build strong children than it is to repair broken men. That's the theme that underlies my address. And there's a part in my assembly where I'm making the point to the student body that not all stress is bad. I ask them, how do diamonds get to be diamonds from carbon under tremendous stress and pressure? So after I explore that metaphor with them a little bit further, I tell them one of my becoming a diamond stories from when I was about their age. And I tell them, when I grew up, junior high was 7th, 8th, 9th grade, high school was 10th, 11th, and 12th grade. I wasn't a bad kid in junior high, but I had a reputation for having a little extra energy. So I decided that when I went up to the high school, I was going to turn the dial down on my persona. And my focus was going to be my studies and my martial art training after school. Well, I'm 2 weeks into my new 10th grade experience at Vestal High School, and I'm having lunch at Carol's. I don't know if you're old enough to remember where Carol's was, but it's where Burger King was, just on the Vestal Parkway below Vestal High School. And we had open canvas, so the place was packed every day. And on duty that day was an officer, Bob Mix. And Officer Mix knew me from karate. And in karate training, regardless of the age differences between people, just as a matter of respect, we address each other as Mr. and Miss. He saw that I was sitting alone. He said, Mr. Perricone, may I join you? Absolutely. He said, so while we're talking, he explains to me that he'd had to change shifts at work, and he'd gone over to see Mr. Ochai twice to tell him that he needed to take a leave of absence, but he didn't find him there during that awkward time in his schedule. So he had a letter. He said, would you mind delivering this to him? I said, oh, I'm going to see him tonight. I put it in my pocket. We're back to school. This is a Friday now. So at the bell, at the end of the day, before everybody leaves for the weekend, next to me is my locker mate, Andy Howie. And Andy says to me, John, some people ask me if you're a narc. I says, I don't even know what that means. He says, somebody who squeals on people who do drugs. I said, why would somebody say that? He said, I don't know. Somebody said they saw you give a list of names to a cop down at Carol's. And I say to the student, you see how rumors get started? He'd given me a letter. Now, so I told him what happened. And he said, oh, don't worry about it then. Saturday morning, I woke up to one of the worst headlines of my life. By total coincidence, 3 very popular seniors at Vestal High School had been busted with a trunk load of speed of amphetamine, and they'd been remanded to the Broome County Jail. What story do you think was going around on Monday morning? When I get to school on Monday, there's small groups of people congregating all over the school talking about this effing narc Perricone. If they find out who he is, they're going to beat the living crap out of him. And someone had photocopied my picture, and it was being disseminated all over the school. And I'm just trying to make my way to my locker. I get to my locker, and it's spray painted in black paint. The narc is dead. I'm in my 4th period history class when the school mafia came to the door, and they're like, you, out here. And I asked my teacher, Mr. Lawson, could I go? Go. I went out in the hall. I said, guys, I'm sorry about what happened to your friend, but you're effing dead. I said, could I just explain? You are effing going down. Now, I had at the time what's called a purple belt in karate, just below brown and black. I thought if 3 or 4 people jump me, I'm going to be okay. But if it's the whole school, Kerri, by noon, it had literally spread through the whole school. Even people that I thought were my friends were passing the hall going, Perricone, what the hell, man? What were you thinking? I couldn't stop it. I couldn't stop. One guy emerged from the crowd. His name was Jim Weiss. He really wasn't even a friend of mine. He was an acquaintance. He was the guy that stepped out of the crowd and asked me what happened. He said to me, you know what? I'm going to stay with you until this dies down. So we're walking behind the school, and it was behind the school that people often smoked, and they're throwing now what looked like bags of oregano at me. I don't think it was oregano. And they're like, arrest this, you effing narc. What are you going to do? We walked down into Carol's, and it was packed like it always was. And in the oh, by the way, I want you to imagine at some point, right around noon, I am now walking down the hall. Imagine 400 people with their backs up against the lockers on both sides out. You are the only person walking down that hall, and 400 people are chanting, narc, 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 narc. And literally the glass shaking like. When I got down to Carol's, it was packed, it was loud. Officer Mick was on duty that day. They started again chanting, there's a narc, narc, narc. Now the glass to Carol's is shaking. And Officer Mick said, Mr. Perricone, what's going on? I said, you wouldn't believe what's happened since last Friday when I delivered that lace. I'm so sorry. I said, you didn't do anything wrong. He says, you know what? I'm going to try to help you. I said, I think I need to save my own soul right now. So I went over to this 12th grade girl who looked like she was fairly mature, and she just swore at me. Get out of my face, you effing narc. I went over to another guy, tried to explain it to him. He swore me off. I went back to this woman. Now Officer Mix is right here. I says, this man is my friend. We study karate together. Last week he gave me this. She could see in my eyes that I was sincere. She says, you know what? I believe you, and I'm going to do my best to undo this rumor in the school. But if I were you, I get out of town for a few days because the people who deal drugs in the school are very upset. Someone's going to stick a knife in your back. I'm like, I got to get out of town. What am I living in a Western right now? Kerri, this went on very intensely for 6 weeks. 6 months lit. 6 months lit. My parents were getting, this is before the internet, threatening letters, phone calls. Your house is going to be set on fire. It's going to be fire bonded. 6 months later, it was still in the air. My senior year of high school, I'm sitting in the lobby talking to one of my friends, and this issue came up, and she said to me, John, I just always wondered, why did you tell on those guys? 20 years later, I'm teaching the physical education teachers at Maine Endwell in what's called the Educational Karate Program. One of those teachers, Dave Cook, was the younger brother of one of my classmates, Scott Cook. When he got home from work that night, 20 years later, he calls his brother Scott. He says, Scott, I work with John Perricone today at school. Do you remember him from high school? He says, John Perricone, the narc?
No way.
At my 20th reunion, one of my friends was going around to tables and she says, John, would you have a story from high school you'd like to share, a significant memory? I'm like, oh, yes. Kerri, I got up and told this story. I wish everybody had cameras back then. I wish I could have caught people didn't know whether to laugh, whether to cry. And I just said to them, there was a point at which I said, I just been waiting 20 years to say to any of you who were chanting at me in the hall that day, go to hell, right? And the place just broke up in laughter. But when I went outside to get some air, the same people that smoked behind the school, they were outside going, John, if I was in the hall that day, I am so sorry. I'm gonna talk to my son and daughter. I've got teenage sons and daughters. They need to hear this story. They need to hear this. So I thought I had put it to rest. And I posted a very short version of this after my 40th reunion. And someone who was at the reunion reached out to me and said, I had never seen the truth of this story. At the 40th reunion, as I was talking to you, I was wondering why you told on those guys. I said, well, apparently you weren't at the 20th where I thought I put it to rest. He said, no, I wasn't. So I then say to the students, why did I tell you this story? I said, I learned that day how powerful peer pressure was. It was like someone had lit a match and it was spreading to the entire school. Oh, we're all hating Perricone. I want to get on that bandwagon. So I say to them at this point, if you ever want to demonstrate to yourself or to others that you're in possession of this inner strength that we're talking about cultivating today, I'd ask you to strive with every fiber of your being. Never engage in a rumor, either on social media or by talking about it can be so very damaging. I said, because someday you may be on the receiving end of such a rumor, and you will so appreciate somebody stepping up to the plate and saying on your behalf, stop it. Hasn't she been hurt enough? Can't you show her some compassion? It isn't true. I says, and when you take the high road like that, you'll be amazed at how many will follow. It takes one person in the room to break the sheep, the herd-like mentality, to set a different course of action in motion. And I tell them, you can be that person. I said, somebody did it for me. Somebody did it for me in 1975. And since then, I've been trying to pay it forward, including telling you this story. And by the way, I look for Jim Weiss. I look for that man who stepped out of the crowd to stand by me for 40 years. He didn't come to any of the reunions. He came to the 40th. He did it. And I couldn't find him on Facebook. I couldn't find him in the phone book. I couldn't find him on the internet. And I approached him with tears in my eyes and thanked him for the compassion he'd shown me some 43 years earlier when we were in the 10th grade. Wow. So there's one of my stories. But, a friend of mine came to hear me speak locally at Johnson City High School. He'd never heard this story before. He called me later that night and he said to me, John, did that really happen? I'm like, no, Stan, I made it up. I said, yes.
Right.
He says, I don't know if I could have survived that. He says, do you know what I was thinking while I was walking up that hallway? Thank you all for helping me become a diamond. You're going to help my diamond shine brighter.
That was the question, the resonating question in my head as you were talking. What was it that allowed you to survive that?
They were helping me polish myself. That was it. And again, had I not had the martial art training that I had at that point, that could have been the end of me, right?
Yes.
So this mindset that you talk about is everything. I was literally saying this is going to make me a better, stronger person.
I wish we could just bottle you up and put you out to everybody, because that's the essence of resiliency, is knowing who you are, no matter what else is being said around you. And, there wasn't the internet when we were in school. And I often think, God, I don't know how I would have survived if there was.
But the
And
fact that that one little gesture of delivering a letter for a police officer who was a friend of mine, that resonated for more than 40 years. Because of a rumor. And what's interesting was the phys ed teacher, it was even in the paper, his name is Al Packer. He came out, he said, I caught these. He did. He caught them he had them open their trunk. You know what people's response to that was? They're trying to cover for Perricone. We're sticking with the story. Yeah.
well, was it Jim Weiss? Was that his name?
Jim Weiss.
So what enabled Jim to be able to stand by your side?
That's something. Isn't that something? He just, at that very, very early age, I always thought of him as an old soul trapped in a 17-year-old body. He just had this wisdom and foresight that he didn't care about what was popular. He was going to do the right thing. He was going to do the right thing. That's part of the conversation that I'm able to continue with students after I share this story with them.
That development of that internal compass, talk about, my husband talks about the excellence of ordinary life, and what an example of just, this is who he is. This is how he sees it.
Right.
It doesn't matter what anybody else is saying. And, I don't know adults that are able to do that, let alone 17-year-old kids. So, and what a powerful story. Thank you so much for sharing that. Because it's such an extreme story.
Yeah.
You almost can't, it's like out of a movie, It really
was.
I saw it.
When we were growing up, they had after-school specials. This could have been a script for an after-school special.
What do we know in Hollywood that we can talk to about getting this out there? Because, boy, there's just so many elements of strength that come to the fore when you talk about it. So I appreciate so much you sharing that story.
And, and regarding my outlook on life, you asked me what's contributed that. I have to come back again to my training with Mr. Ochai. My very first week of training, I heard him utter these words. He used to say to the students, strive to live each day as though you're first, with the realization that it may be your last. I had no idea when I heard that day, that was literally going to become the foundation upon which I would build a philosophy of life. When I awaken each morning, the first two thoughts I bring to my consciousness are these. First one is gratitude, whether you're thinking God or the universe, I got another day. The second one is this, John, today may be your last day in this world. How do you want to live it? That keeps me very, very focused on how I want to spend my limited number of heartbeats, on what's worth getting upset about, what's not.
We're back to perspective.
Yeah.
We're back to perspective, which is, I think, the source of power, because when you have perspective, you have the capacity to make choices. In fact, you're aware that you have choices with an S to make. And there's no greater essence of freedom than having choices.
Absolutely.
And that is what you teach. And so, again,
and nothing worse than feeling that you have no options.
Correct. Well, this brings me to going back to Facebook a little bit. You often post about your lovely wife, Vicki.
Yeah.
Gorgeous daughters, Lauren and Hannah, and the joy you experience as a husband and a father, which are just so evident. What advice would you give to those engaged couples and soon-to-be parents, given the amount of life that you've lived and the quality of the life that you've lived?
Oh, thank you. This is a really important question. I don't know if you remember this lesson, but one of my favorite lessons to teach was entitled "Whom Not to Marry." And it was a checklist based on years and years of sociological research. And I used to say to my students, every time there's a snow day, one lesson goes off the curriculum. And one of the lessons I'm going to be teaching later this year is whom not to marry. Now, you tell me that a couple extra hours of sleep is worth being in a miserable marriage for 6 years. You think about that, right? They were all like deer in the headlights. God, I never thought about that. But, but what I used to say to them was, you're even thinking about spending your life with someone, make sure you go and study your future spouse's family dynamic, because I promise you, it's going to be playing out in your marriage. As I suggested to you, those two dichotomies of how my wife's family dealt with conflict, how I learned to deal with conflict, right? And all that was happening on an unconscious level. 10 years in, oh my God, it made our marriage so much better once that became conscious. You were cognizant of the effect it was having on us. On the subject of parents, parenting, I would say, talk your children often, listen to them often, let them know that you're someone that they can share their heart with, to love them unconditionally, but also to be firm when they need it. I think a lot of parents are afraid to do that sometimes they're too busy trying to be friends with their children as opposed to being friendly. I was friendly with my students, but my students knew where the line was, right? They understood what that line was, the difference in being, right? Being friends and being friendly, and to follow through. Don't, my number one recommendation is don't be a wimpy parent. If you say to your child, if you do this, it'll be 3 days without your cell phone, make it be 3 days. Yeah. My daughters will tell you, if I said 7 days, I marked it on the calendar.
That was that, right?
When my daughter Hannah was 2 and she was going through her throwing a tantrum stage, I remember one day I had to go to Home Depot for something I really needed. I had warned her ahead of time. She wanted to, I said, listen, honey, if you start to throw, we're going out. Right? I was within an arm's reach of this thing. I needed you. I let it go. I took her. Now she understood that my words meant something. So it's very, very important. Those boundaries make our children feel safe. The analogy I used when I was teaching high school was, if you've ever leaned on a railing to look over into a river, maybe you were throwing stones, right? Even though your head went beyond that boundary, just like our children will step outside the circle. You don't step outside the circle. Yeah. That railing, that boundary makes them feel safe. It makes you feel safe.
Yeah.
Very, very, very important. And as they get older, as they start moving into their later teen years, you could start making the pivot from being a manager of their lives to being a consultant in their lives, to let them know to your dying breath, I'm going to be here for you. I'm going to be here for you.
That's the message. We had to have a bit of a talk today with one of the 3 boys, and, you're walking this line of not wanting to tell them what to do.
Yeah.
But wanting to kind of give them the broad strokes and the bigger picture of them in relationship to their own lives. And
absolutely.
What does it mean to show up for yourself?
Absolutely.
What does that look like? And most of the time it'll be uncomfortable because you're pushing against. It's like the seed, the plant in the seed has to break through the seed in order to have the strength, in order to make it through the ground up to the top. And that's something that just never really ends, right? It's something
absolutely.
But I'm excited for our kids to be able to watch this entire video. But I do have still one final question, and that is, when you consider that the man that you've become, and all of the wisdom and all the knowledge that you've acquired up to now, what counsel would you give the young man that you were?
Profound question.
What would you want your younger self to know?
I would say, John, be patient with every trial and tribulation that you encounter in your life, because although you can't see it now, each of them are going to contribute to fashioning a life that exceeds anything you ever could have envisioned for yourself. Those 13, 14-year-old kids, the 5 of them that held you down when you were 8 years old and you couldn't move and you were screaming when they put 20 daddy long-legged spiders on your face, those kids taught you what you didn't want to be in life. They taught you didn't want to be a bully. And they also taught you about your capacity for compassion and forgiveness. Losing your father to a brain tumor at a very early age, taught you to not take a single human life for granted. That homeless man that you're passing on the street, that as you may be averting your eyes, his life matters.
Yeah.
His life matters. I was speaking in Illinois just before COVID. I'd like to suggest a new usage of the term BC, before COVID, because I find myself using it all the time. Yeah, I was speaking in Illinois for some 22 school districts who had all come together under one roof. And a gentleman came and set up a camera and started filming. And then 50 minutes later, he broke it all down. I had no idea who he was. He approached me when I was done, and his eyes were welling up. And he told me that he was a reporter that was covering the event. And he said he was supposed to be back to the station an hour ago, but he says, I needed to hear you to the end, Perricone. And then he posed two questions to me I'd never been asked before. He said, Mr. Perricone, because he'd heard about Mr. Ochai's influence in my life. He said, if you were to distill, at the time, it would have been my 46, if you were to distill your 46 years of training with Mr. Ochai to one sentence, what would you say? What I said to him was this. I said, more by his actions than his words. He taught me to endeavor to live my life so as not to waste a single heartbeat. Then he said to me, may I ask you why you speak? Here's what came out of my mouth. I'll share it with you. It's become my mission statement.
Okay.
I said, we often witness in times of crisis the best of our humanity rising to the surface, complete strangers shielding or coming to the rescue of others, etc. My fundamental belief that every human being has an inherent desire to live their life at the best expression of who they are. But this deeper self, or their true self, if you will, is often buried under layers of what might have been a toxic upbringing, addiction, familial or societal expectations. The goal of my work is to attempt to use my voice to bring this best self to the surface, where it can hopefully become the predominant expression of a person's being rather than the exception. If I may close today with my favorite story about the power that resides within each of us to forge our life's path, to fulfill our destinies, and to help others in our lives that we love do the same. I close all of my addresses with this story. There's a wise man that lives atop this mountain, and everyday adults climb this mountain looking very forlorn, very dejected, very beaten down by life. And after they speak to the wise man, they descend the mountain with a look of peace, serenity, of joy in their eyes. There's a little 12-year-old boy at the base of the mountain who watches this play out every day, and he's jealous of the wise man. But he decides he's going to be the first to outfox him. So he finds a young sparrow in its nest. He's got it cupped in his hands. He has decided he's going to ask the wise man, is the bird in my hands alive or is it dead? The wise man says it's dead. He's going to release it and let it fly. If he says it's alive, he's going to crush it, suffocate it. So he figures he's got this wrapped up. So with great confidence, he climbs the mountain. He approaches the wise man with a big grin on his face. His wise man, is the bird in my hands alive or is it dead? And with a gleam in his eyes, the wise man says, it's in your hands. It's up to you. Kerri, I thank you so much for the honor that you've given me today to be a part of this. And I so look forward to when our lives will meet again in real time, in real time. Yeah, and in the same space.
And that will happen. And it will be my pleasure. And I'm so looking forward to it, John. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
You and for who you are and for what you do. And I can't wait to have more fun.
And thank you for what you've done with your life. I couldn't be more proud of you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Love you.
Love you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.